EdTech Live is sponsored by K12Computers.com, where you can save up to 50% on factory refurbished Dell Optiplex computers, and by TechnologyRescue.com, helping schools reuse existing computer hardware to build state-of-the-art Linux thin client labs at a fraction of the cost of traditional computing. Welcome to EdTech Live. I'm Steve Hargadon, and today is Thursday, August 17th, 2006. My guest tonight is Michelle Moore from Remote Learner, who will be talking to us about the open source learning management system Moodle. Michelle, welcome.
Hi there.
So, Michelle, would you tell us a little bit about what Moodle is, and keeping in mind that there may be people listening who aren't looking at a computer and maybe have never seen Moodle before? Is it possible to even describe it?
It's tough, but I'll give it a shot. Moodle is an open source learning management system, which in a nutshell means the open source means that the code is visible, accessible to people who would want to edit it, modify it. It's not proprietary. And then learning management system would mean that it's a system that people can use to instruct others, provide online content, online activities, online collaboration in all kinds of different environments. Users can do anything ranging from submitting assignments online to taking quizzes online to having discussion forums online, things along those lines.
So in its most basic form, if someone were to start using Moodle, what would they do?
I find that it really depends on the user some. I find that some teachers and trainers I work with really love the online quizzes. They find great value in being able to give a student a quiz and give them immediate feedback about the results and watch what happens to the student learning when students know how they've done on the quiz. Other teachers really love the discussion forums and the opportunities that provides because you're no longer limited by the bell. You can carry on discussions over time. Other teachers really like to have students submit homework online or submit assignments. So instead of students turning in those PowerPoint projects in stacks and stacks of paper, the students can submit the projects online, and the teacher can then grade them online, take care of it all online. Another really useful way that teachers like to use Moodle is to provide hot links or lists of websites to students, because there's always a struggle I find in trying to manage all those resources, and you can use Moodle to share those with your students.
So let's say that I'm a teacher and I'm interested in Moodle, and I sit down at the computer and somehow we've set Moodle up at our school in order for me to be able to use it. When I sit down and bring it up, what am I going to see on that first screen?
On the first screen, if you've been given a course and you're ready to start building, you'll have a kind of a blank slate that's ready for you to customize. In your course, you can start by deciding whether you want a calendar displayed in your course, if you want to bring on RSS feeds, whether you want to turn on the messaging block. You can have all sorts of options in the layout and design of your course. And then you will start building activities. So you'll go to the first section of the course and you'll think about, okay, what are we going to do that first week of school? Or what are we going to accomplish in our first unit? And you start building. So you may start with the lesson, and the lesson presents the content to the student. It's interactive. The student answers the question correctly. They get to go to the next page. If they answer it incorrectly, you can guide them down a different path to help them learn the material better or in a different way. So you give them the lesson, then you may have a discussion forum related to the content in that lesson to get the students interacting and building on that knowledge you've just given them or helped them learn. And then you may follow that lesson and that discussion forum up with a quiz. And so you add the quiz into the Moodle course. And then you go on to the next week and you continue to build and build and revise probably as you go. And then the advantage here is that next year you go to build your Moodle course, you've got this great framework that you can build on that you've already started. You don't have to spend a lot of time recreating or reinventing.
So the teachers who do this, do they typically start out feeling a little bit nervous and scared about sort of jumping into something like this if they haven't done it before? And if so, then how long does it take them to feel comfortable?
Some teachers I find are a little nervous. It depends on how they're approaching this Moodle thing. I'm fortunate enough to have met a lot of teachers that are just so excited by the possibilities and concepts that it totally overrides any fear that they might have had, and they're just ready to jump in and figure out where they can start and how do they start using this. But there are some teachers in some school districts, they've adopted Moodle, and they're not quite sure about how to, how to use this in their classrooms. But I find that as they start to realize the possibilities, even if there's a little fear at first, as they start to realize the possibilities and they think about the ways that they can use Moodle, and they start to see, even more importantly, the impact it has on their students, then that trepidation disappears just a little bit, and they become more comfortable. I think the key in an environment like that, when I'm working with teachers like that, is to focus on one or two modules and to really figure out what works for that teacher. Is this the teacher that really needs the discussion forum, and that's where they need to start? And if that's the case, I teach them that, and we start using that. We use it for a few weeks until they're comfortable, and then they start asking questions, usually about, okay, this is cool, where do I go next? And then I'll lead them down that path to additional modules. I think it's important, just like anything that you're learning, break it down into small pieces instead of trying to focus on all the things that Moodle can do. Focus on one or two things, learn how to do those well, and then build on that.
So you said that the students will respond, and that generates enthusiasm. Why do the students respond positively? What's taking place for them?
All kinds of things cause the students to respond positively. There's the one thing that we've seen over time is that computers and online activities are just naturally exciting and engaging for students. This is the world they live in. This is what they like to do. And if they can do their homework or their schoolwork on the computer, then they're much happier about doing it. So there's that. The other advantage, or the other cool thing that we get here, is that students start they have opportunities to get instantaneous feedback or more frequent feedback about what they're doing, what they're learning. So if they take an online quiz, they have the option to get immediate feedback. They know right away what they missed and why they missed it, and their learning improves. They really do like that immediate feedback. And in discussion forums, I'm not just writing the paper or writing my response to turn into the teacher. I'm writing my response to share with the whole class. And I will get feedback and comments from the other members of my class, and I find students will go back to Moodle, in the evenings on weekends to see who's responded to their discussion forum post and what they had to say. So the students are excited about the interactivity that they have inside of Moodle.
So typically they're interacting with other students in their class. Can that actually be bridged? Can they be interacting with other students in another school who are working on similar material, or is it contained within the Moodle installation?
You can do it both ways. I've seen schools that are self-contained and teachers who run excellent classrooms online in Moodle just within their school building or in their own classroom. But I've also seen some really interesting projects in which students have collaborated around the world. There's a teacher who teaches in South Carolina, named Art Later, and he teaches German, and he actually paired up with a teacher from Germany, and the students corresponded throughout the course of the school year and really expanded their learning experience. It's one thing to learn German from the teacher, but to have a chance to talk to other German students is kind of cool. And so they used Moodle, and I think they just shared Moodle installations. They were both using it. And then this summer, actually, they went and traveled to meet each other. I think they met up in Germany. So the possibilities are unreal.
That sounds really interesting. The schools that want to implement Moodle, what kind of computing resources do they need to have?
This is probably a little more technical than my area of expertise would involve, but I know that in terms of resources, technology resources, that Moodle is pretty low key, and Martin Duguiamas, the guy who created Moodle, has designed that way on purpose. He wants Moodle to be available and accessible to everyone. I know that the school district that I worked for, when we first installed Moodle, we threw it on the same server with our email server, and we ran it there for a very long time. and it was very little impact in terms of the load on the server. So it doesn't take a lot of resources in terms of hardware and technology.
So we should probably describe that there are two real components here. The first is a program which runs on a server, which drives the back end of Moodle, and that can either be loaded on a server at the school or can be hosted remotely somewhere. And there is the actual interface to Moodle that the students and the teachers use, which my understanding is just requires a web browser. Is that correct?
You're exactly right. Exactly right. The students and teachers can access everything. Depending on the Moodle setup, I've seen some schools set it up so that it's totally internal and everything is accessed from web browsers at school. But I think the ideal situation is when the students and teachers can access Moodle from home, anywhere that they have a web browser, then they can participate in their courses.
So that seems to me to be pretty significant. First, that you wouldn't necessarily have to go out and buy new computers for the students in the school, that any existing computers that can have access to the internet and are using a web browser are going to have the functionality to be able to use Moodle. And then second, that it can actually be done at home.
Yeah.
So the student goes home and they're able to actually participate in the discussion forum or the quizzes or looking at the course material when they're not actually physically at the school.
And it really happens. I was talking to a teacher just a few weeks ago, and we were on summer break, and the teacher, she taught third and fourth grade students this past year, and she said she was poking around in her Moodle course, and it was really interesting to see the number of students who were logging in, even over the summer, just to go back and participate and use the links that she'd provided there. And then it's not uncommon in weekends, evenings, to see students checking discussion forums and interacting with the course. It's a different level of engagement than you get with that textbook.
So some of the enthusiasm that you're expressing or that you're communicating that others are feeling reminds me a lot of the feedback that educational bloggers are getting, that the kids become really excited and enthusiastic. And in the blogging, it seems to be largely because of the feedback and the peer review. And so it sounds like the same thing is true for Moodle?
Yes. There are many ways that students can collaborate inside of Moodle, whether it's the discussion forums. You can set up wikis inside of Moodle so that students can collaborate and create documents or projects together. There's a blogging feature in Moodle 1.6 that was just released, so students can share their work that way or share their thoughts. There are many different ways that they can collaborate and get involved in their Moodle course.
One of the interesting things about conducting these interviews over the last few weeks is to discover that there are really two sort of significant threads right now in educational technology that are of great interest to a lot of people. The first is whether or not technology actually has an impact on performance. And we've interviewed a couple of school districts where their ability to put computers into the classroom for significant amounts of time has actually really made a difference, a measurable difference. The second issue is just the concern about students' safety and their online activities. So it sounds like Moodle for sure is addressing the first, that it's a use of technology that's actually making a difference. Would you say that's true?
I would definitely say that's true. There's stories all over Moodle.org about, things that teachers are doing with their students and how it's changed their teaching and how it's changed what they're seeing in the classroom.
Do they feel that student performance is actually improving?
Yeah, actually, I was reading a post just a little bit ago. This teacher was talking about how the semester that she started using Moodle, the number of failing students in her class dropped significantly because, again, the level of involvement on the part of the students was just different. They were more interested and involved in the coursework, so of course, they learned better and were completing assignments. So, yeah, it makes a difference.
Yes, and you said something that was interesting to me as well, that just the use of technology seems to be engaging. And certainly Moodle would appear to be a technology that has inherent capabilities to help improve learning. but it seems like also just the act of using a computer, which is so familiar outside of school, would engage students who would otherwise maybe feel like they weren't fully engaged.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how that happens. They're using the computer all the time, and you wouldn't think that it would quite have that impact. But I think the problem is that we have a lot of teachers who haven't quite evolved there, and there's some really great teachers out there who are really engaging, but it's hard to get that one-on-one interaction all the time with all the students that you can kind of accomplish with Moodle.
It sounds like it does leverage the technology in such a way as to provide not only good feedback from the teacher, but also from other participants in the course.
Mm-hmm.
So the second issue, which really has sort of been a hot button for a lot of people lately, has been the use of wikis and blogs and the revealing of any kind of personal data that might compromise the safety of a student. When you do wikis or blogging within Moodle, is it contained? Can it be protected in such a way that a parent wouldn't be concerned that their student is now being exposed to predators on the web?
Yes, you can definitely contain it. You can set up your Moodle site so that nobody can access anything until they log in with this designated username and password, and the school can decide who gets those usernames and passwords. You can restrict wikis to the course level. You can restrict wikis to the student level so that each student has their own wiki. You can also, with the blogs, you have some of the same controls available. You can set it so that students can only create blogs that are visible within the Moodle site. You can set it so that blogs are visible to people all over the world. Again, that's a choice that a school district can make about the level of, control they have over what's visible to the outside world. There's some other interesting features that are built in to Moodle to kind of provide some protection for students as well. You can do things like set it up so that your Moodle site never displays the last name of the student. So if by chance someone were to get in or come in and visit the course, that all they would see is the first name of the student. So they're really cautious of that.
Can parents be given access if a parent says, I want to be aware of what's taking place, or the conversations that are taking place? Do they have any way to gain access to the blogs or the wikis?
Somewhat, and it depends again on how the school sets things up. You can, as a teacher, give guest rights or guest access to your courses, and a guest who comes into your course would be able to see discussion forums, contributions to wikis, depending on the level of the wiki and how that wiki is designed. So the parent could come in and see things that way with guest access. You can also have a little bit of control over that too if you want to give guest access with a password and require that you can get in as a guest, but you have to have this password. Then that protects your students a little bit more too. At this point, another way that I encourage parents, if they're interested in what's happening inside of the Moodle course, is, and this is just best practice in general, I think, sit down with your student and ask them to log in and show you what they're doing and what's happening. Now, one thing that I am looking forward to in 1.7, with that said, though, is that 1.7 is going to introduce roles inside of Moodle, and with roles you'll be able to create a role in which it's designed specifically for a parent. So you can say this parent is associated with this student and here's what this parent can see. So for those students and parents that can't get together, or they're in different locations, things like that, you can still give them the access and allow them to see what their student's doing inside of Moodle.
So I would imagine that has, a little bit to do with the parents' familiarity with the web and maybe nervousness about it, mm-hmm. and also probably the age of the students. So I hear a lot about that, but does it actually ever come up in practice? Do you have any schools that you've worked with where they've had parents who really wanted to be able to watch what was going on?
When I was teaching, I did have a few students. Their parents came to me and said, I want to keep up on what my students are doing or what they're not doing more specifically in these cases. And I said, you can log in as a guest and you can come in and look at what's happening in this course and what the assignments were, because all of that was visible to a guest. But then I also encourage them to do the same thing, sit down with your student. If your student's not doing homework, then there are other issues going on, and sitting down with them to look at this might be might be a good idea anyway. So there are actually some parents who really do want to come in and see what's happening inside of the Moodle course to check things out.
Good, that's really interesting. So what's the youngest class that you've seen where the teacher has actually been using Moodle?
The youngest class I've personally seen, second graders using Moodle. Moodle has an activity called the Choice module, and the Choice module allows the teacher to present a single question, and then the students could go in and select a radio button and make a selection, and with the Choice activity you get nice bar graphs and tables displaying information. So it's kind of a neat way to get the students into the program. The students loved it, and then also, teach graphing concepts and things like that. These second graders actually also did discussion forums, which was kind of neat. The teacher would ask things about field trips they'd taken and stuff like that, and you'd go in and read these discussion forum posts, and they'd only be like a sentence long, but it was really neat to the students. And you have students at that age, when they're doing things like that, that's so exciting. They'll go home and tell their parents, and they can log in at home and show their parents what they've done, and it's really exciting.
That's a lot younger than I expected you to say.
Yeah.
But it is interesting.
And I think I've heard of younger, It's a different kind of use, but, it's possible.
So is Moodle going to change the way that things are done? Moodle's based on an educational philosophy. And what kind of changes do take place when people start using Moodle?
First, will Moodle change the way things are done? I think that Moodle will play a large role in the way things are changing, and I think in some cases it will help facilitate that change. The changes that I see when I see teachers use Moodle is Moodle's based on a social constructionist pedagogy, which means when Martin developed Moodle, his idea was, and his belief was, that students learn best when they have an opportunity to interact with each other and construct knowledge or construct things for each other. And so when Martin designed Moodle, everything is really based on that philosophy, and Moodle lends itself towards that type of teaching really well. Not to say it's not flexible and can accommodate other styles of teaching, but what I find is a teacher will start to go into a Moodle course, and maybe they start with some very traditional instruction, and they start by presenting the lessons to the students, and they start by giving the quizzes to the students. But then over time, I find that the tools, since they lend themselves so well to this different type of instruction, that the teachers start to adapt and they start to think differently. And I saw it on myself too. In the beginning, I'm used to presenting information to my students and getting responses. But over the years, as I've used Moodle, I've started thinking of everything and twisting it. Okay, instead of me presenting the information, how can I get the students to present it to me and put it together and construct it? And the results are tremendous. It makes a huge impact in the way a teacher teaches and the way the students respond.
So obviously you have a little background here. Why don't you tell us what your background was and what brought you to Moodle?
Sure. My background is middle school math and elementary education. I taught middle school math for 9 years, and I think it's been about 5 years. 5 years ago, I started working on my master's degree in instructional design and technology at Emporia State University. It was an entirely online program. It was great, a wonderful opportunity, and interesting in that I had an opportunity to see what it was like to use learning management systems as a student. As I completed that program, I had to start working on my master's project, and for my master's project, I decided my goal would be to find an alternative to some of the more expensive learning management systems. Because the school district I was in, we were looking at, these are some really cool tools and things we would like to use, but the price was just beyond our budget and we couldn't afford it. So I started looking and researched a lot of different learning management systems. My husband, Jonathan, worked with me to install some of the systems, and I tested them out. He'd give me feedback about the technical side and how well they were designed and that sort of stuff. And then I would look at it from the instructional side and evaluate the tools and see what was possible. And as I worked on my master's project, I found a couple that were pretty interesting. But in the end, Moodle won out by far. Moodle's tool set was a lot broader. There were a lot more options in terms of what it could do. And the community surrounding Moodle was a huge selling point. At Moodle.org, there are thousands of teachers and business trainers and developers all working together, and it's a community unlike any other I've ever seen. And they're so friendly. I was talking with someone the other day about the bond that exists with members of the Moodle community. You can go there and you can freely ask a question and people will respond and help you out. And they're very nice about it. And that community was also very encouraging, because when you start to look at open source projects, that's one of the things you want to see. If the community is very active, that's a very good sign for the future and the future of the development of the program. So the community was great. Feature set was great. And the ease of use. I used it with students. I helped some other teachers use it in my testing and research. And people kept saying over and over again, it's just intuitive. It's intuitive. It's easy to use. And found Moodle as a result of that master's research project, and then I started presenting Moodle at conferences around the state, and then on a broader level around the country. And then last summer, I was fortunate enough to meet Brian Williams with Remote Learner, and he's a Moodle partner, and he came to me and he said, I've got too much training to do. There are too many people picking up on Moodle, and they want people to come out and show them how it works and what things do, and so I need some help. And so last year, I started working for Remote Learner half-time, and continued with my school district as an instructional technology specialist. And the last year I've traveled all over the country training school districts and organizations on how to use Moodle. And then July 1st of this year, I actually went full-time with Remote Learner. So this year, traveling a lot, working on documentation and support and things along those lines for Remote Learner. It's very exciting.
Well, so part of what you said may help the listeners to understand what it means for a program to actually be open source. Because can you explain that a little, and explain how that compares with a commercial model for these kinds of products?
Sure. Open source software at its most basic means that a person can go in and actually see the source code. By definition, that's what open source means. But the philosophy and the development process surrounding open source software, I think, is what really defines it. With open source software, instead of having one person who's writing all the code and developing it and having total control over everything that happens, in open source software, you have a community who comes together. And at Moodle.org, I'm trying to think, last count, there were 150 or so different contributors or developers on the Moodle project, and each one kind of has their own area, things that they're working on, things that they're developing. Martin still does lead at the helm, and he provides some direction, but people can come along and contribute code and say, here's an addition that I needed, and I'll share it, and you can use it, and you can add it to your installation. The real power in this model is that, one, as a user like myself without the technical expertise, is I can go to the Moodle community and say, hey, I'm using Moodle and I have this idea and I think it would be awesome if we could do this. And in the community there'll be a developer that'll come along, and he may go, oh yeah, I never thought of that. And he may actually code it, and ta-da, it's in the code. I don't have quite that same relationship, with the developers at Microsoft to be able to say, hey, I want this change, and I can tell somebody who will do it for me. So there's the power in that you have an opportunity to provide direction about how the software is developed and what it looks like. The other power with open source software and the ability to modify the code is that if you download Moodle and you're using it in your school district, and you as a school district have a specific need or something you don't like, then you can modify it to make changes to the code to make it meet your specific needs, or you can hire somebody to come in and make those changes. So you're not limited by what the box says it contains. You're not limited to how it's supposed to work. You can do whatever it is you want to do with the Moodle software. As opposed to other proprietary systems, if you ask to see the code behind Blackboard, they're probably not going to hand that out to you freely, and you don't have a lot of options in terms of how you can modify things. You cannot go into the source code and make significant changes to how the program works. So you don't have that same level of flexibility and control.
One of the fears I hear expressed often about open source software is that you will get on a path of spending a lot of money to customize it or get support. Does Moodle really end up being cheaper than a product like Blackboard?
Let me address the first part, and then I'll address the cheaper part. I see some people who look at Moodle and look at different software systems, whether it's proprietary or open source, and they see 15 things they want to change right off the bat. I know plenty of school districts and organizations who are using Moodle, the straight download that comes off of the Moodle site, and don't change a thing. In fact, it was really interesting to me when I started working for Remote Learner and looking at or talking with a lot of different people about how they wanted to use Moodle, to hear people say, I'd like to change this and I'd like to change this, because I had been using Moodle for like 2 years and never changed a thing about it and loved it and was only excited every time I saw an upgrade, because I was like, ooh, new features, it was great. But so some people want to make these changes, but again, they're not required. The cool thing in terms of cost is that if you want to make customizations like that, or there are things you want to change, the neat thing is you can pay for those customizations instead of paying all the money for the licensing. So I know school districts that are paying $60,000, $70,000 easy for some of their learning management systems, and Remote Learner and other Moodle partner companies, they can get people in the door at the same level, the same number of students, for $15,000, $16,000. So instead of spending the money on the licensing, you can spend the money where it really matters. Getting it to do exactly what you want it to do. You can spend money on training. You can spend money on content development and paying your teachers to take the extra time that it's required to put their content into a system like this. So I don't think that it's really has to be more expensive, and I think for most people who are switching from another proprietary system, they'll find that it's really cheaper.
So that's interesting. So with all due respect to Remote Learner, somebody could do this on their own even without consulting with a Remote Learner, right? I mean, they could download the software, figure it out, and they could run. And then they have some options to pay for the support if they want.
Yes. And we have people who run the gamut. I know a lot of people who have downloaded it, installed it, the districts that are using it. That's what our school district did, and ran it without problems. On the flip side, we have districts who install it and are running it, and then they do call Remote Learner for support. I think the advantage in working with the company, and this is a shameless plug, but is that we do have the expertise to provide the support. We've worked with a number of different Moodle installations, and if you have a problem, we've probably seen it before, run into it, and we can help you with it.
Interesting. Okay, so well, if it's too shameless a plug, I can always delete it out of the recorded version.
Okay.
Well, I think we'll allow you to leave it in.
Okay.
So tell me about the patent award that was made last week here in the United States. The award to Moodle, and then Moodle's immediate response. I'm sorry, not to Moodle, to Blackboard, and then Blackboard's immediately responding by suing another company with a learning management system. What's the impact of that going to be, and what do you personally think is happening?
The impact, I don't know that we can say exactly what the long-term impact will be. I think that we really have to wait and see. I do know, based on, there's been quite a bit of discussion in the Moodle.org community about this. Basically, the feeling is the patent itself is kind of shaky, or pretty shaky, because there's a lot of prior art out there to demonstrate that Blackboard did not invent this model, and they're not the originators. Therefore, by definition, this patent really, shouldn't be valid. But again, I guess that's up to the courts to decide where that's going to go and what's going to happen with that. We'll just have to watch our system and see what they decide to do. in terms of Moodle, Blackboard has actually posted on their website that they're not interested in going after open source companies. They're more interested in proprietary companies. So I guess, it's not set in stone that they couldn't, do something. But I don't know. I'm really curious to see where it goes. I think it'll be a long, drawn-out process, and Moodle, in the meantime, will keep growing and developing and providing alternatives. We've actually talked to a few people who have said, I'm leaving Blackboard because I don't like what they've done, and they've started looking at other options, whereas otherwise they may not have. So that's kind of interesting and exciting to me.
And what I also hear you saying is that there's really no immediate impact to Moodle users. It's not as though Moodle is in any way right now being threatened as a part of that patent lawsuit, and so it's not really having an impact on the Moodle community at this point.
Not at all. The only impact is the discussion forum thread that's been taking place and the outrage that's been expressed. And then I guess the other impact would be the efforts of the Moodle community to contribute to the websites that have been developed to collect prior art, because we don't want to see Blackboard succeed in this, because again, they're not the first. They didn't develop this, and we don't really agree with the concept of awarding them a patent for this.
Do schools face any political hurdles when they try and implement an open source program like Moodle? Are there things that typically come up that would be helpful to know in advance when someone's thinking about implementing Moodle, which is obviously non-commercial, so maybe not that familiar to regular school districts or schools? Sure.
One of the things that I used to see, and I don't see it as much anymore, was just a general fear of open source software. They didn't understand what open source was, and they thought that open source wasn't reliable or wasn't stable, or that you couldn't do this or you couldn't do that. And there were IT people who didn't buy into the open source philosophy. Again, over time, over the last 3 years as I've been using Moodle, that's become less and less of an issue, because Moodle is just, has the quality and the options to kind of dispel that. And I think open source software in general is really kind of starting to stand out. People at the NEC conference in San Diego in July, were witness to that. There were tons of open source sessions and a lot of interest in the open source programs. So I think that was initially a concern that had to be overcome, and it still exists in a few school districts. I think that other hurdles that people may encounter is say, well, it's open source, who are you going to go to when you have problems, or where do you get support, or where do you get help, where the documentation is poor. I think that Moodle really has developed a model to overcome all of those hurdles. Moodle has a great documentation website that's continuing to develop. Moodle has the Moodle Partner System, so there are a number of companies that can provide a school district with support and development and hosting, all the same things that you can get from a proprietary company. So those would be the protests that I would expect, but I think that there are some very legitimate responses to those to overcome those.
I would agree with you that there was sort of a buzz at NECC about open source, and we can do a plug on the other side now, because we will be holding the Open Source Lab again in Atlanta in the summer of 2007.
Awesome.
And that should be a lot of fun. What was interesting to me to see was that I think in a lot of ways Moodle is really doing something healthy for open source in the educational environment. As you and I both know, there were maybe 15 sessions that we held there for open source software in San Diego at NECC, and 3 of them were given by you, and all 3 were standing room only, packed. Even the last session of the conference, toward the end when people are ready to go and have maybe many of them have already left, you had a packed crowd. And
It was
so,
incredible.
from my standpoint, one of the things I see Moodle doing is it's really helping to open the door to open source software to schools, because it's such a compelling application and people are really loving it and they want to know more about it. And then they learn that it's open source, and it opens the door to understanding a little bit better what open source software is.
You've explained it perfectly. That's exactly the way I see it too. Jonathan and I were having this discussion, or we've had it several times. He's been an open source proponent for a long time, long before I started, learning about what it was and how it worked. And he said, over the years, the thing that has been interesting is, in a lot of cases, when I try to present open source software to people, I have to convince them and I have to cajole them to get interested or to at least explore it. He said Moodle is the one piece of open source software that I present and, I'm fighting them off. People just jump right on board because, like you said, the software is just that good.
That's really exciting. Can you give me some success stories? Some thrilling stories of where Moodle's been implemented and you really feel like people are excited about it and it's made a difference?
Yeah, they're all over. It's really cool to go to conferences and meet people and they talk about how they've implemented Moodle with their students, or there were students who weren't involved before, weren't passing, and now they are, and students who are excited to come to school or they want to do their Moodle work. A lot of stories like those, things that are exciting to the Moodle community as a whole, and we feel as success stories. Like the Open University has recently adopted Moodle, and Open University is the largest online university in the world, I believe. And they're looking at like 180,000 students on their Moodle implementation. So for the Moodle community, that's a huge success story. There's similar ones in other locations around the world. Athabasca University in Canada, the largest distance learning university up there, has adopted Moodle, and then there are a number of universities in the U.S. Humboldt University has been doing great work with Moodle out in California, and I think they have the most Moodle courses of any Moodle site in the world, according to the Moodle website. So I think, for me, the success stories, they're all the individual success stories about the students and teachers where we're making a difference. Those are great. And then just to watch Moodle grow and it's to take on a larger role and have a greater impact just in education in the world, to me is a great success story too.
Well, so open source, the theories behind open source software in those circumstances might indicate that Open University or Humboldt would, through adopting Moodle on such a large scale, maybe end up doing some coding work and then contribute that back to the community. Has anything like that happened yet, where large organizations have adopted Moodle and then are contributing back to the Moodle code?
Yeah, and that's part of the excitement behind the Open University adopting is the Open University has a team of 9 or 12 programmers that they have hired to work on Moodle customizations, and everything that they're doing with Moodle, they're contributing back to the larger community. So I know there's one guy at the Open University who's taken on the quiz module, and that's his job, his responsibility now. And I know that Open University team works very closely with Martin, and everything that they're doing, they're working together with him on their roadmap to make sure that Moodle heads the direction that we are all wanting it to, so that the efforts aren't duplicated and that they're mutually beneficial. Humboldt has also been contributing Moodle code for a long time. Michael Penny out there works with, I think, 5 or 6 students and has for the last several years. And they've done a lot of really great gradebook work and course menu blocks. There's all kinds of things that Humboldt has created that are really popular in the Moodle community. So it's a great asset to have organizations like that pick up Moodle and start giving back, which is, that's the power of the community, and that's the way it should work. So it's exciting to see.
So if I wanted to learn about Moodle from scratch, and I've listened to this interview, and now I want to go find out more. Are there any books? Are there any websites that really start from the beginning that would help me if I'm just, if I don't feel like I'm technically that competent, that will help sort of ease me into a better understanding of how to start with Moodle?
Yeah. The one website that I would refer you to, first of all, would be Moodle.org. That's where the community is, and that's where you'll find all those really helpful people. So visit there first. There are some demonstration courses there that you can go and play with. You can also go to our website at remotelearner.net, and there Moodle.remotelearner.net, and there are demonstration sites there as well that you can play with. There are also a couple of books, and the one book is Using Moodle by Jason Cole, and that was released, I think, last year. And I talked to him recently, and he's actually planning to release another book or an updated edition in the spring, hopefully. So that'll be interesting and exciting to have. And then there's another book, and I'm trying to remember the name of it actually. I think it's Teaching with Moodle, and the author is William Rice. And I haven't had a chance to read that one yet, but it's on my list. I'm going to take a look at it. It's getting some positive feedback in the Moodle.org discussion forums. So, and then another site to visit that would be helpful would be docs.moodle.org. It's a Moodle documentation website, and there's some manuals available there and tutorials that you can use. So whatever type of learner you are, there are places that you can go to learn more.
So, Michelle, are there sites where I could go and actually log in and see what a course is like and play around a little?
Yeah, there are courses at Moodle.org that you can visit. If you go to the Moodle Features demo, there are sample courses there that you can play with, and there's information there about how to log in as a teacher so that you can actually play as a teacher or an administrator on that site. The Moodle.remotelearner.net site, there are also, as I said, there's the course there that you can play with from the student perspective. And if a person sends me an email and says, I want to play with Moodle from the teacher's view, then I will give them a demo course and they can play with it so they can see what Moodle is actually all about.
Well, Michelle, you've been great, and you always are informative and lively and helpful. So I have one last question, which I've saved for the end, that I think many people are going to want to know, which is, why is it called Moodle?
Moodle stands for Modular Object-Oriented Dynamic Learning Environment, but more importantly, I think it relates to, Moodle is actually a word, and the word Moodle means to kind of meander and go along picking up things as you go. And that's kind of the philosophy that Martin holds in terms of how education and learning should be. It shouldn't be this really rigid, structured path in which the teacher decides what happens and where things go. It should really be an opportunity for students to learn what they need to learn when they need to learn it, because that's really the world that we're moving into and going to be living in.
Michelle, thank you so much for your time. Next week, we're interviewing Victoria Davis and Adam Frey on Wikis. Vicki is the technology director at Westwood Schools, where they have a wonderful wiki site and where she uses wikis with her students. And Adam is one of the founders of Wiki Spaces, a very commonly used public wiki program. Michelle, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.